Welcome to the Dad Nation podcast, where men go from good to great in their life and love. Now more than ever, our world needs strong, courageous, and compassionate men, because we believe that when the dad gets better, the whole family wins. You see, this movement is called Dad Nation, but ultimately this is for the wives, the children, and the generations to come, because we also believe that every wife and child deserves a father who is pursuing greatness. I am your host, Mitchell Osmond, and I am genuinely so grateful, and I'm humbled that you've chosen to spend your most precious resource, which is your time, with me today. Okay, today we are getting into the mind, okay? We're going to talk about the 5 ways to hack your brain and accomplish more than ever in your life. But before we get into it, I've been getting a little bit of feedback from some of you, and you know what? Y'all have said it's been great, but some of you have been saying some of my content is a little bit dense and hard for you to really take it all in, because there's so much packed in an episode. And so I want to listen to that, and I don't want to put too much in an episode. So I'm just gonna dial it back a little bit. All right, say if I was at 11. We're just going to bring it back to 7 or 8. Okay, I'm going to slow it down a little bit. I'm going to put a little less content in the episodes, just so that it's less overwhelming. I know there are some of you out there like me who are just total geeks, and you're taking notes and you're digging into it. But for the vast majority of people, I think it's probably wise to consider just not dumping too much on you per episode. Okay, but you know what? I'm not going to apologize about it, because I'm a learner. I love to learn. Actually, one of the biggest revelations I've had over the past few years is that I actually love to learn about how to learn. It's called meta learning. This is one of my passions, is simply learning. And if I can learn how to learn faster, then I'm all in. And so what you're hearing and what you're experiencing through the Dad Nation podcast is a result of years of me just learning, and now just sharing with you what I've learned over the years. So without further ado, let's get into it. The 5 ways to hack your brain and accomplish more than ever. Okay. One of my favorite coaches in the world, his name is Rich Litvin, and he says this: you are 6 inches away from everything you want in life. And that 6 inches is right between your ears. And the reality is that the mind is really like an infinite power. There's no limit to creativity, to ideas, to willpower, to your dreams. You see, our minds are completely capable of helping us accomplish an enormous amount of things in our life. They can make or break us, like I said. I want you to think about it this way. How you think will determine how you act, right? And then how you act will determine how others react to you. So when you think about it, how you think will ultimately determine how others treat you, right? And so it's really important for us to think about what we think about, right? It's really important for us to be aware of what's taking up our thoughts. And there's a lot going on in our brain. So your mindset is really made up of beliefs, assumptions, and attitudes that you hold about yourself and the world around you. All of our behavior is driven by our beliefs. So when we get into setting goals and accomplishments, we really first need to address our beliefs and what we think is possible, or what's not, or what's not possible, right? In the book, The Magic of Thinking Big, Dr. David J. Schwartz writes this: the body is what the body is fed. By the same token, the mind is what the mind is fed. Mind food, of course, does not come in packages, and you can't buy it at the store. But mind food is your environment. All the countless things that influence your conscious and subconscious thought. The kind of mind food we consume determines our habits, our attitudes, and our personality. Now, each of us has inherited a certain capacity to develop, but how much of that capacity we have developed and the way we have developed that capacity depends on the kind of mind food we feed it. The mind reflects what the environment feeds it, just as surely as the body reflects the food you feed it. Now, you may have heard this term, a growth mindset or fixed mindset. Do you know, if I were to ask you what you have, do you know if you have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? So I walk through an assessment with guys all the time, and I'm going to put the link to this in the show notes below. And it's a free test that's going to help give you clarity and really be able to shine a light on how you think and if you have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. And I want you, if you're doing this test, I want you to really please be honest. Don't answer about how you want to think, but answer for how naturally you think today. Now, we'll talk a little bit about that before we jump into the hacks, because it's really important. If you're going into this with a fixed mindset, none of this is going to matter in this episode, right? But like I said, there are two types, right? Fixed and growth mindset. So having a growth mindset means thinking that you can get smarter, that you can be better at things, and more talented if you work hard. On the other hand, a fixed mindset means that believing that your intelligence and your abilities are just the way they are and can't really change, right? For example, let's say there's somebody who wants to start their own business, but they need to understand finance and how to do it. If they have a fixed mindset, they might say, nah, I've never been good at math or finance, so I just can't run a business. It's not for me. But if they have a growth mindset, they would say, I may not know much about finance now, but I can learn and practice until I get really good at it. You see, this idea of growth and fixed mindsets was created by a psychologist named Carol Dweck in her book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success in 2006. So Dweck explains that people with a fixed mindset get upset when they face difficult challenges because they feel that they can't improve. But those with a growth mindset believe that they can gain the knowledge and the skills that they need to succeed and see the challenges as opportunities to learn and grow. This positive outlook on learning can be really helpful for entrepreneurs who face many challenges as they try to succeed in their ventures. So having a growth mindset means welcoming your mistakes and imperfections as opportunities for personal development and improvement in the future. You see, with a growth mindset, you recognize that learning takes time and setbacks are just a normal part of the process. And this positive outlook empowers you to strive for improvement and achieve your goals. On the contrary, adopting a fixed mindset leads you to conceal your mistakes, fearing that they define you as a failure. And this will hinder your ability to learn from your errors and move forward. You see, this fixed mindset might make you feel ashamed of your work and unmotivated to make positive changes in your professional or your personal life. So we're going to get into the hacks, but I just wanted to pinpoint that and give you that assessment to do, because like I said, it's really important that we go into this episode and the following episodes with a growth mindset to say, hey, I'm here to learn. I'm open-handed in this. I want to grow. I want to make the most of this one life that I have. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay, let's dive in. The number one concept I want to talk to you about today is the concept of neuroplasticity. Have you ever heard the phrase like, this is who I am and I can't change, or I'm just a forgetful person, or I'm just kind of dumb, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or anything like that? Well, these things aren't actually true, and science proves it. But we say these things as kind of a cop-out phrase because we don't necessarily want to change. We don't have the courage to make the changes that we need to make. Now, a better way to say something like this is how I think currently, and I don't want to do the work required to change my thinking. Because here's the truth. You can change your brain. Not just your thoughts, but the physical characteristics of your brain. You can mentally, emotionally, and physically become a different person by working on your decisions and your mindset, and it's called neuroplasticity. Brain expert and author Jim Quick, he wrote a book called Limitless, and it's phenomenal. He explains it best in his book called Limitless. Here's how it works. He writes this. Neuroplasticity means that every time you learn something new, our brains make a new synaptic connection. And each time this happens, our brain physically changes. It upgrades its hardware to reflect a new level of the mind because our brain is malleable. We have the incredible ability to change its structure and organization over time by forming new neural pathways as we experience, learn new things, and adapt. Neuroplasticity helps explain how anything is possible. Just as there are people who have suffered from strokes and have been able to rebuild and regain their brain functions, those that procrastinate, think excessive negative thoughts, or can't stop eating junk food, these guys may also rewire and change their behaviors and literally transform their lives. You see, this term plasticity means that our brains are moldable and shapeable to our hopes and dreams for our lives. This means that your intellect, your habits, your future, your body, your dreams are all able to be changed and achieved. And this is great news because thanks to the power of neuroplasticity, we can explain how people are literally capable of accomplishing anything they want. And this explains how people beat all the odds and reach unbelievable heights and accomplish imperceivable goals. The second big factor that contributes to people becoming high achievers and accomplishing much in life is because they are aware of and harness the power of their reticular activating system. Okay, that's number two, hack number two. So we're going to combine all these things at the end of the episode, and it's pretty incredible. So the number two hack is understanding the power of the reticular activating system, or I'm going to call it R.A.S. moving forward. So every single second, your five senses, sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste, take in up to 11 million bits of information surrounding you. And if your brain were to try to interpret all that data simultaneously, you would literally go insane. You would lose your mind. But this is where the R.A.S. or reticular activating system kicks in. Think of this as like a deletion device for your brain. And what this means is it only allows your brain to focus on what's most important in any given moment or what you're trying to make sense of. It allows your brain to ignore meaningless and repetitive stimuli and conserve its processing power for the things that matter most. This is why you can drive to work and not remember how you got there. Your R.A.S. kicked in the whole time. So basically, it helps us see the things that matter and helps us ignore the things that don't. Remember how I was telling you in a previous episode that up to 95% of our day is made up of subconscious actions and thoughts? Well, that's largely thanks to your R.A.S. You think about it. If you were driving to work and you noticed every single thing that you saw, the clouds, the blades of grass, the birds flying, the power lines, the cars in front of you, the colors, it's millions and millions of things. You wouldn't even be able to pull out of your driveway without having a panic attack. So it's a beautiful thing how this works. Another common scenario where you may have experienced the R.A.S. in action is when it allows us to observe or see things for the first time that were always there. So for example, have you ever started researching, to buy a new car and you decide on the car that you want to get? So you start looking up these cars on ads and different things. And all of a sudden, what happens? The next day, you start seeing these cars everywhere. Now, how does this happen? It's because our brain is simply an interpretation tool. It's constantly just looking to make sense of things, to help find a solution. So the reality is that car, that model of car has always been in your sphere. They've always been passing you on the road. You've just not been able to see them. Things that were invisible now become visible, thanks to the power of observation and what the R.A.S. allows you to see. This is a powerful concept. And here's why. Because if you focus on the negative things in life, like negative circumstances, relationships, and all that stuff, your brain will begin to focus on that, and it'll continue to find more of that to help confirm your negative bias. And then your thoughts are confirmed, which then causes your R.A.S. to filter out the positive and focus on the negative things. And so on goes this vicious cycle of negative thoughts. That, my friends, is the proven, undisputed truth that when you focus on the bad things in your life, you will literally begin to see more bad things around you because your R.A.S. will kick in and you'll start seeing the negativity, not just in your life, but in the life of your family, your friends, your colleagues, and so the downward spiral begins. But if you begin to focus on the positive things in life, you will begin to see more reasons to be content, to be more fulfilled, to be grateful. And your R.A.S. will also go to work for you in a good way in this case. You've probably heard of the law of attraction, right? Now, this is kind of a woo-woo thing that people talk about, and there's a lot of different theories around this. But honestly, at the end of the day, I really do believe that this is really what the law of attraction is. This is part of how this principle works. You aren't magically attracting yourself to things that were never there. Your mind is just now focused on growth and focused on opportunities or gratitude or positivity. So it naturally begins to highlight all of those things so that you begin to observe, acknowledge, and participate in them for the very first time. You've also heard of the term manifesting, right? I'm going to manifest this, which is totally not in my realm. This is not what I believe in. I don't believe that you can manifest things. However, I do believe that maybe people mistake manifestation for just the power of the reticular activating system. Because when the R.A.S kicks in, it can feel like this feeling of manifesting or magnetism. But in reality, it's just a shift in your vision and your perspective to see things that you otherwise couldn't see. So it feels as though they came out of nowhere when they were already always there. Okay, there's an exercise that I want you to do. It's called the gorilla experiment. I'm not even going to tell you the details of it because I don't want to spoil it for you or ruin it. But I want you to go on YouTube. I'm going to put the link in the show notes below. But I want you to go to YouTube and just type the gorilla experiment, or just hit the link in the show notes. And I just want you to watch the video and follow its promptings. It's going to blow your mind on the power of the R.A.S and how it changes what we see. So in this conversation of being blind to things and not necessarily seeing things in front of you, Jordan Peterson writes in his book, The 12 Rules for Life, he writes this: that's how you deal with the overwhelming complexity of the world. You ignore it while you concentrate minutely on your private concerns. You see things that facilitate your movement forward toward your desired goals. You detect obstacles when they pop up in your path. And you're blind to everything else. And there's a lot of everything else. So you're very blind. And it has to be that way because there is much more of the world than there is of you. And what this means is you can do something about it. You can literally change what you see. You can retool your brain thanks to our prefrontal cortex. You see, we can pull our subconscious thoughts into our conscious mind. We can observe them, change them, which changes our perspective and our views of life and completely rewire our brain and then keep moving on. Again, in his book, 12 Rules for Life, when speaking of the power of our focus, Peterson writes this: if things are not going well for you, well, that might be because, as the most cynical of aphorisms has it, life sucks and then you die. Before your crisis impels you to that hideous conclusion, however, you might consider the following. Life doesn't have the problem. You do. At least that realization leaves you with some options. If your life is not going well, perhaps it is your current knowledge that is insufficient, not life itself. Perhaps your value structure needs some serious retooling, or perhaps what you want is blinding you to what else could be. Perhaps you are holding onto your desires in the present so tightly that you cannot see anything else, even what you may truly need. So that is the reticular activating system, a function of the brain that can go to work in your favor or not in your favor. But in any case, it's very important for you to be aware of and that's why it's so important to be super intentional about what you focus on, what you read, what you listen to, what you observe, right? That's why it's so important to do things like practicing looking for moments of joy in the day, or practicing gratitude, practicing getting rid of some of this negative self-talk and language, because it will literally change the way you think and will change what you see. The third brain hack I want to bring to you today is stress management. Now, this may sound a little silly, but stress is huge. But here's the thing, we all carry stress. Right? It's inevitable, but it's important to realize that stress management is key to your holistic health. You see, stress affects how you eat, how you work out, how you parent, how you speak to your spouse, how you spend your money. Ongoing continual stress can be detrimental to your brain, which in turn will affect every foundation of your life. We talk about family, our fitness, our finances, our focus, our faith, our future, all that stuff. Stress levels affect all of that. And here's why. When you're stressed, there's a hormone called cortisol that spikes in your brain. And your body pumps out more of that cortisol so that it can alleviate the physical rigors of stress on our bodies. You may have heard of the term fight or flight mode. But here's the thing, prolonged Prolonged high levels of stress can keep you in this perpetual state of fight or flight, which can cause high levels of anxiety, worrying, paranoia, which then perpetuates more stress, which then creates more cortisol, and so the cycle continues. A health blog from Harvard states this: there is evidence that the chronic and persistent stress may actually rewire your brain. Scientists have learned that animals that experience prolonged stress have less activity in the parts of their brain that handle high-order tasks. For example, the prefrontal cortex, which is what I mentioned earlier, and more activity in the primitive parts of the brain that are focused on survival, such as the amygdala. It's much like what would happen if you exercise one part of your body and not the other. The part that was activated more would become stronger, and the part that got less attention would get weaker. This is what happens to the brain when it's under continuous stress. It essentially builds up the part of the brain designed to handle threats, and the part of the brain tasked with more complex thought takes a back seat. And that's a blog from Harvard Health coming out of Harvard Health Publishing. Another key factor here in his book, What Happened to You, Dr. Bruce Perry explains this hierarchical organization of the brain and explains how it develops, how we process information, and how we respond to situations. And he explains it like this: it starts from the bottom up. You see, at the bottom of the brain, at your brainstem, this is our more primitive part of the brain. It controls things like our body temperature, our breathing, our heart rate, our fight or flight response. And at the very top, which is the last filter, this deals with our speech, our language, and our abstract thought, and the capacity to reflect on the past and envision for the future. If you're watching on YouTube, I have an image up on the screen here, which basically goes through these levels of thought in the brain, starting with the brain stem, all the way up through the limbic and to the cortex, prefrontal cortex, and it shows exactly what each part of the brain is responsible for. Sometimes we think of the lower part of the brain as the reptilian brain because it does not really allow us to do more than a reptile, right? They can only live in the moment and react. They can't really plan, they can't tell time, they can't reflect on their life or dream for the future. And on page 29 of that book, What Happens to You, he writes this: all experience is processed from the bottom up, meaning to get to the top or the smart part of our brain, we have to go through the lower, not so smart part, right? This sequential processing means that the most primitive reactive part of the brain is the first to interpret and act on the information coming from our senses. The bottom line is this: our brain is organized to act and feel before we think. This is also how our brain develops, sequentially, from the bottom up. The developing infant acts and feels, and these actions and feelings help organize how they will begin to think. But here's the thing, you know what's crazy? When we are in a heightened state of stress or dysregulated emotionally, like when we're stressed and we're anxious and emotional, our brains get stuck in this lower reactive and responsive level. And that means in this state, we actually find it incredibly difficult to do things like be able to think about the consequences of our decisions, to be able to dream and plan for the future, because we can't impartially think about our emotions. We can only react. We can't even really control our language most of the time. This is why stress management is so critical in the short term and the long term. For example, here's some things I'm talking about in the short term and long term. In the short term, say for example, you get in a fight with your wife or your kids and you start to lose your temper. Your stress responses are activated and you begin to lose control of your language, your ability to think critically, and your ability to reason. And what happens is we get reactive, not proactive. In this situation, have you ever felt like you have no control? Like you feel like an animal, like a beast, you know? And that's because you kind of don't have control. Psychologists have studied brain activity during these times of heightened emotions and stress, and it's almost identical to the person who's having a manic episode. From a psychological perspective, you are experiencing short-term insanity. So no wonder you lose your cool. This is why after the fight is all over, you think, why did I do that? Why did I say that? That was crazy. And that's because your regulated brain would be filtering these decisions to the top. So the solution is, of course, when you feel those stress responses rising up, step away, Take some deep breaths, right? Allow your heart rate to lower and get into a more regulated state. Engage the limbic and the cortex parts of your brain. And we talked about this in episode number 7 with James McLeod, how to keep your cool and acknowledge your emotions. So if you're listening to this and you're a guy who's really having a hard time with that, go back and listen to number 7, okay? Hugely helpful. A way that this affects us in the long term is in the same way that we live through periods and seasons of high stress or anxiety, we get perpetually stuck in this lower way of brain function, right? We make decisions that are poorly based on reacting to what's going on in the real time instead of being able to step back, reflect on the past, dream about the future, and make decisions about how we want to spend our time and develop ourselves. In other words, if you're living in a stressful environment, it's even harder for you to make elevated, wise, and future advancing decisions. And this is why people get stuck in life. This is why they live the same year over and over again with no changes. Because they're just in this perpetual state of stress and they can't even think on a higher cognitive level. So what's the solution? Is to fill your bucket regularly, to prioritize doing that regularly, to take care of your body, your soul, your mind, and your relationships. And if you're listening to this and you feel like your life is pretty stressful, maybe your marriage is stressful, I got a guide for you. I say this often in our episodes, but it's called the Roommate Remedy. It's 113 ways on how to have fun with your wife. Now, this guide is going to help you find fun activities to do with your wife, to have fun again, to elevate your intimacy, to kind of get back to that feeling of when you were dating, right? But that's the cool thing about that is that's going to help solve this problem of being super stressed all the time and feeling that pressure. It'll break you out of that. Here's the crazy thing about cortisol and stress levels. It can actually cause you to gain more fat. It can cause you to lose muscle and so much more that we're now discovering, like the physical effects of high levels of stress on your body, because our body responds physically to these heightened levels of cortisol. Like when we go to fight or flight, it instinctively says it begins to store fat because it's in fight or flight. So it doesn't know when it's going to eat again, right? So even losing fat can be more difficult when we're not prioritizing stress management. Sidebar, when we exercise, this is why exercising is so important. Stress-fighting neurochemicals like norepinephrine, oxytocin, and dopamine are released, which helps improve our mood, boost creativity, and lower stress. This is why exercise is so much more than physical. All right, number 4. Okay, number 4 is going to be another one that maybe is a little simple at the first mention, but we're going to dig into it a little bit and help you understand the importance of it. Number 4 hack you can do to accomplish anything and have more willpower and control in your life is prioritizing sleep and rest, okay? Scientists have proven that sleep is critical for your overall mental, physical, and emotional health. Dr. Gene Kim, a psychiatrist and clinical assistant professor of the psychiatry at George Washington University, he says this: increasing evidence has tied lack of sleep to a host of mental and physical disorders, including increased depression, irritability, impulsivity, cardiovascular disease, and more. One study noted that sleep actually functions as a sort of laundry cycle for the brain, where during sleep, blood vessels and lymphatic channels in the brain hyperfuse and flush out metabolic buildup from the day and remove neurotoxins and distribute components that enhance cellular repair. More on this laundry cycle idea in his TED Talk about sleep. Dr. Jeff Liff from the Oregon Health and Science University states that while we are awake, the brain is so busy doing other things that it doesn't have the capacity to clean itself of waste. And this buildup of waste is called amyloid beta and is now being linked to the development of Alzheimer's disease. In his TED Talk, he says this: when the brain is awake and at its most busy, it puts off clearing away the waste from the spaces between its cells until later. And then when it goes to sleep and doesn't have to be as busy, it shifts into a kind of cleaning mode to clear away the waste from the spaces between its cells, the waste that's accumulated throughout the day. So what does this mean? Prioritize your sleep, okay? Do your best to get 6 to 8 hours a day. And if you can't get that whole stretch during the night, consider pausing to take like a quick power nap throughout the day. Number 5 and final concept that I want to teach you about today is called the Zeigarnik effect. And let me explain to you what that is. In the 1920s, there was a Russian psychologist by the name of Bluma Zeigarnik. And one day, as she was sitting at a restaurant, she observed that the waiters in the restaurant were very efficient and effective at remembering the customer's orders while they were in process, but had a tendency to forget who ordered what once the orders were completed. Now, she was interested in this, so she held a study where she had people perform simple tasks but interrupted them periodically. And after the experiment, she questioned the patients on what they remembered and what they couldn't. Her findings were that those who had been interrupted were 2 times more likely to remember the things they were doing before the interruption than the tasks they were able to complete without interruption. This is called the Zeigarnik effect. And what it means is that uncompleted tasks have a tendency to create a certain amount of tension in our minds that keep the task at the forefront of our minds until we complete it. Some people call this open loops, right? Now, why is this important? Because this is what happens when we procrastinate and we push things off. You're familiar with this feeling, right? There's this sense of unrest. There's a tension. There's a stress that exists like a looming cloud that's over your head because you know the thing that you haven't finished yet because it's not a closed loop. You haven't completed the task. But these thoughts can impact our sleep. It can trigger anxiety. It can have a further negative impact on our emotional and mental well-being. So what's the solution? Do the thing. Just do the thing. And if it's overwhelming, break the thing into small bite-sized pieces that are not as overwhelming, right? And then you can finish the task, even though it may be part 1 of 5 tasks if you've got a big project, but at least you can finish the task that you set out to do, and then you can have peace of mind and continue on throughout your day. So for an example, don't make a goal to lose 50 pounds, right? That's too much. And it's going to be exhausting and overwhelming. Make a goal to lose half a pound a week, right? Or 1 pound per week. And then as you look at a more practical, achievable short-term goal, you will be less overwhelmed. You'll be less prone to procrastinate. And this is going to increase your chances of drastically achieving that goal simply because you're able to complete that task each week. Focusing on 1 pound is a heck of a lot easier than the daunting number of 50 pounds. Or if you need to create a giant proposal, don't put the pressure on yourself to write that proposal all in one evening. Right? Break it into sections over the course of 2 weeks. You'll be far less stressed and you'll get it done. Break it all down into pieces. And that night when you go to write that part or that afternoon, fulfill the task that you set out to do and then close the loop and then have peace of mind and continue on with your day. You see, breaking your ideas and your deadlines and your commitments and your goals down into smaller sub-goals will reduce stress and it will prevent you from procrastinating and it will greatly increase your chances in completing the task and getting it off your mind. All right? Now, I want to share a bonus with you. I mentioned this in, I believe, a couple episodes in the past, and I think this is fascinating because it's new research that some of the world's top neurologists have discovered within the past few years. And this is a brain structure that we're learning about called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. All right, and neuroscientists are saying that this is the catalyst to your willpower, okay? Some of you are going to love this, some of you are not going to love this. But this brain structure, which is called, like I said, the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. So what they're understanding from studying this brain structure, that there's a lot of data in human trials showing that when people do things that they don't want to do, like exercising or reading or eating well or whatever the thing is that you want, that you know you should do, but maybe you don't necessarily want to do. Or when people resist doing something that they want to do, like resisting temptations, this brain structure gets larger and it grows. And here's what's interesting. The anterior mid-cingulate cortex is smaller in obese people, but it grows bigger as they diet. You see, it's much larger in athletes, and it's especially large in people that see themselves as being challenged or overcoming some significant challenge. And here's the interesting thing. In many ways, scientists are beginning to see this as one of the main factors that will determine your willpower and even your will to live. You see, all the data points to the fact that this area can be built up. But as quickly as we build it up, if we don't continue to do the things that are hard for us, that part of the brain shrinks again. Now, here's an important distinction. If you begin to enjoy the things that you once didn't enjoy, that you started, like working out and reading, these same tasks lose its effect on this part of your brain. This is why it's important to constantly look for new ways to challenge yourself, to do things you aren't good at, and maybe things that you don't enjoy for your own good. And you do this to keep your will strong and developed. So neuroscientists are discovering that this is why people get stuck in ruts and cannot form new good habits, or they cannot kick bad habits. Because they're simply only doing the things that they enjoy, and they're not dying to their desires for their own benefit. For example, maybe they're not monitoring what they eat, they're not exercising, they're not reading, they're not putting their phone away or taking control of certain parts of their lives, or they're facing addiction or control issues. So in a real simple way, from a neurological perspective, if you want to develop more willpower and make your mind stronger and more resilient, you must engage in doing the things you do not want to do. And this is why I say, and this is why you hear so many people say, if you want to have a strong willpower, the dedication to do anything, you have to do hard things that you don't naturally want to do. You have to make promises to yourself that are a little bit uncomfortable, and you need to keep those promises to yourself. And now, for the first time ever, we can prove that when we do this, our anterior mid-cingulate cortex grows larger. I love this quote from Niccolo Machiavelli. He says this, "Where the willingness is great, the difficulties cannot be great." In other words, it doesn't matter what you're facing in life. If you grow in your willpower and your self-control and your resilience, this is the doorway to taking the steps, dealing with the setbacks, making a consistent effort, and ultimately creating the change in your life that you are seeking. And people have often said to me, well, you just have the gift of discipline. Or they say to me, things just come easy for you. And I'm gonna tell you right now, they don't. Now, while I appreciate this encouragement, my discipline is not a gift. I wasn't born a disciplined person. I didn't come from an environment that was like high discipline. It's not something that was gifted to me. It is something that has been grown and nurtured over the past decade. I've worked incredibly hard in my family, in my finances, my faith, and my fitness, my focus to create a different path than the one that I was on. Now, I'm pretty stubborn, which helps. I will say that. Here's one example of a way that I have overcome adversity. Now, many of you won't know this, but when I was in grade 10, I signed up for a choir class, okay? And at one point, my teacher actually pulled me outside the classroom. I'll never forget it. He pulled me into a little corner, and he said, "Listen, Mitch, you can't sing." I remember so clearly. He said, "I have no use for you in this class. So maybe you should sign up for gym or computer sciences or something like that." Here's the crazy thing. I went on to graduate high school. I went on to go and study and get my bachelor's degree in music and major in classical vocal performance. I sang in German, French, Italian, and every genre you can imagine. I ran a music studio. I've taught tons and tons of people how to sing. I mean, I became a music director in one of the largest churches in Canada, singing in front of thousands of people. But I was told to sign up for gym class because I couldn't sing and my choir director had no use for me. Listen, you can do it. Okay. I also hear people say all the time, I'm just not disciplined enough to, or I'm just not fit enough to, or I'm not stable enough to. And I respond, yet, not yet. I'm not disciplined enough yet. I'm not fit enough yet. But listen, just to bring it full circle, the phrase, I'm not disciplined enough, do you think that statement implies a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? I will tell you right now, it implies that you have a fixed mindset. That statement implies that you feel as though you are a victim of the life that you've been given and you cannot change your circumstances. But the truth is, if you want to, you can adapt, you can grow, and you can change by leveraging the power of neuroplasticity, by understanding how your reticular activating system works, and by taking control and managing your stress and getting more sleep and rest, and understanding the rules of the Zeigarnik effect, and understanding the anterior mid-cingulate cortex and how it's so important to do things that are difficult and that you don't always want to do. Leveraging the power of these 6 things, man, it's powerful. And it leads to, like, a person who struggles with forgetfulness can develop a fantastic memory. A person who struggles with rage can learn to control their emotions and become known for their calmness and their even-keeledness. Someone who struggles with obesity can overcome their challenges with food and become a fit and active person and live for that cause. A person who struggles with insecurity can become self-confident and self-assured. It's a powerful thing, you guys. So I say all this to say, as we wrap up this episode, dig into these concepts, okay? And I want you to think about this as a couple last things before we wrap this up. Out of the things in your life that you face every day, what are areas in your life that you feel like you have a fixed mindset where you need to have a growth mindset? Maybe there are things that you say to yourself, man, I'll just never be that guy, or I'll never be able to do that thing. You know, do you find yourself saying those things? Have you ever thought about your thoughts? Because your thoughts inform your words inform your actions inform your life and the quality of the life that you will live. Have you thought about what you think about? And lastly, if you're listening to this and you're watching on YouTube, I want to know in the comments below, what of these things resonated with you the most? What are these things that you heard and you're like, that's it. I never realized that, but this is going to help me really kind of unlock my brain and help me to achieve more, or help me get out of this rut that I'm in. Let me know in the comments below. Let's start the conversation. Love to walk alongside you in whatever way I can, help serve you. And if you're here and you're struggling with some of these things, and you feel like maybe you're in a rut in your finances, or in your fitness, or in your marriage, whatever the situation might be for you, and if you feel like you need some help and there's a way that I can serve you, please reach out to me. I coach men in all these different areas, and I'm happy to come, like I said, I'm happy to come alongside you and serve you any way that I can, and help give you some of these practical systems and processes that can help you unlock different things in your life where you've just been stuck, okay? So that's it for me today. Listen, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. I hope it wasn't too dense, too intense for you. I hope you were able to take away some incredible nuggets from this. You had some powerful insights. If you want to connect with me at any point about the things that we've mentioned, or you want to take advantage of any of my services, or any of my free resources, whatever the situation might be, you can hit me up on Instagram at DadNationCo, or you can check out the website. I've got a ton of resources there. It's dadnationco.com, or you can hit me up via email, just mitchell@dadnationco.com. You got my info. Let's connect. I'm here for you. I believe in you. I am in your corner, my friend. Have an incredible week, and you will hear from me next Monday with another incredible episode of the Dad Nation podcast. Okay, see you guys later.